Without the Ryukyu Islands, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is incomplete. In today's video, I will thoroughly explain the millennium-long relationship between China and Ryukyu. This will help everyone fully understand why pushing for the restoration of Ryukyu is an inescapable historical and moral responsibility for our generation. As early as the Sui and Tang dynasties, Chinese fleets crossed the ocean to reach these islands. From afar, they looked like coiled dragons, so they were named Ryukyu, coiled dragons. During the Song and Yuan dynasties, the name Ryukyu was continuously recorded in Chinese historical texts. However, as scholars copied the manuscripts over time, characters were mistakenly written. Ryukyu became Ryukyu in the 5th year of the Hongwu era of the Ming dynasty. In 1372, Sino-Ryukyuan relations underwent a massive transformation. Founding Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang dispatched an official, carrying an imperial edict far across the sea to Ryukyu. In legal terms, it officially became a tributary state of the Chinese dynasty. Since the 16th year of Hongwu 1383, the Ming dynasty enforced a maritime ban, but to trade with the mainland successive generations. Over the next 500 plus years, whenever major events like an imperial succession occurred, Ryukyu had to dispatch envoys to China to request imperial investiture. Only after China granted this investiture was the king of Ryukyu recognized as the legitimate ruler. Ryukyu and noble youths were required to study Chinese characters and read the 4 books and 5 classics. Even official documents were written in classical Chinese. Today's ruins of the Ryukyu royal palace are practically a replica of the Ming dynasty forbidden city. That plaque-reading land of propriety features calligraphy personally bestowed by the Ming emperor. Appreciating Ryukyu's profound loyalty and obedience, Zhu Yuanzhang reciprocated their kindness by placing them on the list of countries not to be attacked. He wrote in the imperial Ming ancestral instructions that China would never invade Ryukyu, nor would it ever allow other nations to invade Ryukyu. To rapidly boost Ryukyu's lagging productivity, Zhu Yuanzhang also carefully selected skilled artisans from Fujian and sent them across the sea to Ryukyu. These people were known as the Min clan. They brought the Central Plains' complete set of agricultural techniques, architectural crafts, and Confucian culture, rapidly driving forward the progress of Ryukyu civilization. Play an important role in Sino-Ryukyuan relations. The 36 Min families brought China's political culture, along with Fujian's literature, art, shipbuilding, and porcelain-making civilizations. To this day, many people still bear the surnames Lin and Kai. Our ancestors were sent by the Ming dynasty, and they were from Fuzhou. Their ancestral shrines, memorial rites, and holiday customs remain almost identical to those in Fuzhou. With the Ming dynasty being so generous, Ryukyu naturally felt deeply grateful. To cite just one small example, it fully demonstrates how fiercely loyal Ryukyu was to the Great Ming. In the 1590s, the Ming dynasty received intelligence that Toyotomi Hideyoshi was about to launch a massive war of aggression against China. Japan's invasion routes primarily consisted of 2 paths. One was crossing the Tsushima Strait to occupy the Korean peninsula, and then advancing north to attack Beijing. The Battle of Shanghai followed this very route. With the Great Ming's vast territory, it was impossible to fortify everywhere. The top priority was figuring out which route Toyotomi Hideyoshi would actually take. Relying solely on Korea was definitely not enough. To save themselves, Korean monarchs and ministers swore to high heaven that Japan would definitely attack Korea first, but their intelligence was unreliable. Ryukyu, however, was different. Although many overseas Ryukyu and Chinese lived in a foreign land, their hearts constantly worried about the safety of their homeland. They spent vast sums of money to bribe officials in Kyoto, Japan, to spy on intelligence. Finally, they discovered that Toyotomi Hideyoshi's primary invasion target was Korea. Fearing that sea winds and waves might be too strong, the Ryukyu government dispatched more than a dozen waves of messengers back to China to deliver the news. Even if only a single wave successfully delivered the message, it would mean the Great Ming still had loyal subjects overseas. It was precisely because of the intelligence provided by Ryukyu that the Ming emperors and ministers resolved to deploy heavy troops toward the Korean peninsula. After the fall of the Ming dynasty, due to historical inertia, Ryukyu bowed and paid allegiance to the Qing dynasty, continuing to act as a tributary state of China. However, toward Qing culture, Ryukyu felt deep aversion in their hearts. The Orthodox China in their hearts remained the Great Ming. Anyone who has traveled to the Ryukyu Islands knows that during traditional cultural events, the people wore Great Ming attire, followed Great Ming customs, and practiced Great Ming etiquette. The Manchukuo hairstyle and official Manchu garments, and titles like Ama and Nyang were never adopted by Ryukyu. Life muddled along like this until 1872, when Japan, merely 4 years into the Meiji Restoration, brazenly launched an invasion against Ryukyu. From any perspective, Japan's strength at that time was far inferior to the Qing government's. Had the Qing government adopted a firmer attitude, it would have very likely repelled Japan's aggression. However, late Qing rulers felt that Ryukyu was far overseas, and saving them was useless. Falling out with Japan over a mere Ryukyu simply wasn't worth it. Making ever-increasing demands is always standard behavior. For aggressors, the weakness and incompetence of the Qing government greatly stimulated the aggressive ambitions of the Japanese. In 1879, Japan unilaterally announced the annexation of Ryukyu, incorporating it into Japanese rule and renaming it Okinawa, pinning its last hopes of national restoration on the Qing government. A Ryukyuan envoy named Lin Shigong knelt outside the gates of the Zhongli Yamen for 2 days and 2 nights, weeping bitterly before the coming and going Manchu Qing officials. After finishing at the Zhongli Yamen, they ran to wait outside the East China Gate of the Forbidden City, the mandatory passage for officials attending court, kneeling and crying their grievances to any passing royalty and ministers. Many officials were deeply moved, but the court's policy was already set, leaving them to only comfort the envoys not to cry out loud, so the Japanese wouldn't find out. In 1880, Lin Shigong committed suicide as a martyr, in protest against Japan's proposed plan to divide the islands and revise the treaty, making a final plea with his death to the Qing government to help Ryukyu out. Upon learning the news, the Qing government simply remarked that he was a loyal subject, ordered a lavish burial, and then that was the end of it. From then on, Japan began its colonial rule over Ryukyu, lasting over 100 years, continuing right up to the present day. In 1945, the Battle of Okinawa broke out. US and Japanese forces engaged in a brutal life-or-death struggle on the Ryukyu Islands. Over 10,000 Japanese soldiers died and 7,400 were captured, while about 10,000 island residents died. Many people claim that the fact 10,000 commoners died alongside the troops fully demonstrates that Japanese militarist brainwashing was extremely successful, and that the Ryukyu Islands had completely integrated into Japan. This claim is absolute nonsense. The true history is that after the Japanese defeat was sealed, they knew the fate of the Ryukyu Islands would either be independence or belonging to China. And it could never be a Japanese colony again, since it was no longer Japanese territory. They engaged in unbridled killing, burning, and looting. dragging the Ryukyu Islands down to perish alongside Japan. Those 10,000 Ryukyu Island residents did not willingly sacrifice themselves for militarism, but were actively massacred by Japanese soldiers. After the war, to cover up that criminal history, the US and Japan mobilized their propaganda machinery to turn black into white. The Ryukyu Islands actually had a chance to shake off Japanese colonial rule, as long as China was willing. The Ryukyu Islands could be placed under Chinese trusteeship. Whether independent or incorporated into China, it would be decided by the Chinese themselves. But Chiang Kai-shek at the time was entirely focused on fighting the Civil War and had no interest in overseas affairs, repeatedly turning down Roosevelt's inquiries. Once you fail to grasp a ready-made opportunity, that opportunity never comes back. In 1950, the Korean War broke out, making it impossible to hand them over to China. In 1951, the US and Japan signed the Treaty of San Francisco. In 1972, the US and Japan made a backroom deal behind closed doors, transferring the administrative jurisdiction of the Ryukyu and Daito Islands over to Japan. The Ryukyu restoration issue and the Diaoyu Islands issue that we are familiar with today have persisted ever since. Looking back at history stirs deep emotion and endless sighs. Countless words gather into one sentence. If we cannot help Ryukyu restore its sovereignty, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is incomplete. In today's video, I will thoroughly explain the millennia-long development of Sino-Japanese relations, helping everyone fully understand what kind of vicious wolf Japan truly is. Japan first established diplomatic ties with China during the Eastern Han Dynasty in the reign of Emperor Guangwu. The Japanese archipelago was transitioning from a tribal society to a state regime, forming hundreds of large and small tribal states. The king of one of the larger tribes, wishing to leverage the authority of the powerful Han Dynasty to gain supremacy over other tribal kingdoms, sent envoys to pay homage to the Han Emperor, offering to become a Han vassal and begging the Han Emperor for a title, Emperor Guangwu Luxiu. Understanding the customs of these Japanese tribes and appreciating their respectful gesture of traveling from afar, specially bestowed a gold seal upon them and conferred upon their state the name Wa, and their king the title King of Wa. The original gold seal bestowed by Emperor Guangwu still exists today, displayed in the Fukuoka City Museum as a top-grade national treasure designated by the Japanese government. They took pride in this designation for a long time. How did the name of the Japanese nation come about? That would have to wait over 600 years until the Tang Dynasty. Japan's first large-scale war with China was the Battle of Baekgang in 663 AD. To stop Japan's aggression against the Korean peninsula, Tang Dynasty forces crushed the main Japanese fleet at Baekgang. After this battle, Japan was thoroughly humbled by the Tang Dynasty, dispatching numerous Kentoshi envoys to China to comprehensively study Tang politics, economy and culture. Facing the studies requested by their former enemy, the Tang Dynasty did not hold anything back. Instead, they handed over their very best things to Japan, pushing Japanese civilization a major step forward. Giving just two random examples can illustrate how deep the Tang influence on Japan was. Long-term civilizational exchanges with China brought the Japanese out of a state of barbarism. They also felt the name Wa did not sound pleasant. So in 703 AD, Japanese envoys came to China and formally petitioned the Tang Emperor to approve changing their country's name. Wu Zetian was ruling at the time, and to demonstrate the Tang Dynasty's far-reaching benevolence and the grand magnanimity of the Chinese nation, Wu Zetian issued an imperial decree officially renaming Wa to Japan. The term Japanese we use today originated this way. Second, after arriving in China, Japanese envoys deeply studied Chinese culture and brought original classics like the Book of Documents and the I Ching all back to Japan. The Japanese treated these like supreme treasures, viewing Chinese classics as divine objects, and immediately decided that imperial-era names must be chosen from Chinese classics. The familiar Emperor Meiji drew his name from the I Ching, the wartime leader Hirohito's era name. The people are clear and intelligent, and all nations live in harmony. It wasn't until the Reiwa Emperor in 2019 that Japan broke away from choosing names from Chinese classics, for the first time in over 1,000 years. Aside from this, Japan's writing, poetry, tea ceremony, clothing, architecture, and institutions were all transmitted from the Tang Dynasty. To this day, Japanese society still retains strong vestiges of Tang culture such as Todaiji. It is no exaggeration to say that China is the cultural motherland of Japan, and the Tang Dynasty bestowed an enlightening, recreating grace upon Japan, a fact that even the Japanese themselves do not deny. Without the unreserved teachings of the Tang Dynasty, today's Japan could not possibly exist. This is also an important reason why many historians today harbor criticisms of the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty was simply too open, teaching all its good things outward, without hiding a single bit, which allowed surrounding tribes to quickly close the civilizational gap with China, directly leading to China's inability to achieve complete unity. For centuries afterward, having acquired China's most advanced civilizational achievements, how did Japan treat China, its cultural motherland? When weak, it lurks and bides its time to build strength. When strong, it immediately bares its fangs and bites at China. Japan's second large-scale war against China was the Imjin War, Ming Dynasty's Wanli Korean campaign. From 1592 to 1598, Toyotomi Hideyoshi ended Japan's warring states period. His ambition swelled to the brim, and he mobilized his entire country's might to attack Korea, intending to use Korea as a springboard to invade all of China. Please note that starting from this period, invading China had already become a persistent, established national policy for Japan. Later invasions of China were merely repetitions of a story from centuries prior, not newly invented theories. He immediately dispatched a massive army to aid Korea and resist Japan, routing the main Japanese forces. The name Li Rusong may not be familiar to many friends, But he was the primary commander of the Ming Dynasty's expeditionary force against Japan, leading the charge on the front lines and refusing to retreat even when surrounded. Crimson banners flutter in the autumn wind, while petty officials wash their wine cups by night. The killing chi is strong in spring, and the bones of those evil forces are already cold. Through the single poem written for the Korean envoy, Lee Rusong proved himself a great anti-Japanese national hero. Toyotomi Hideyoshi died of illness and despair, and Japan once again humbled itself before China, submitting once more to the formidable power of the Ming Dynasty. One can only say that the Ming Dynasty at the time lacked modern concepts of international relations. With such a glorious military victory, they could easily have forced Japan to cede territory and pay indemnities. The First Sino-Japanese War of 1894. Due to the corruption and incompetence of the late Qing government, Japan defeated China on the Korean peninsula for the first time in 1,000 years. This unprecedented victory drove the entire nation of Japan completely wild with frenzy. Nationwide celebrations lasted for over 2 months, so much so that even the Japanese ministers participating in the Shimonoseki negotiations grew deeply anxious, worrying that excessive celebrations might provoke a nationalist backlash from China. During the Shimonoseki negotiations, 200 million taels of silver in indemnity, ceding the Liaodong Peninsula and ceding Taiwan and the pescadores. Even the arch-trait Li Hongzhen was shocked by the terms put forth by Japan. During the talks, he pointed at the nose of Japanese Prime Minister Ito Hirobumi and said, "China won so many times previously, yet never demanded any territorial cessions or indemnities from Japan. Now that Japan has won by a stroke of luck, do you want to swallow all of China? China is so vast. Can your Japan possibly swallow it?" Japan's stomach was desperately empty right now, and it couldn't wait to swallow China in a single bite. Li Hongzhang was shot in Japan, which reduced the indemnity by 100 million taels. The triple intervention returned Liaodong, but added another 30 million taels in ransom fees. The final price tag of the Treaty of Shimonoseki was China paying Japan 230 million taels of silver, ceding Taiwan and the pescadores, and opening treaty ports. The indemnity of 230 million taels of silver equaled over 3 years of Japan's fiscal revenue. Japan's national strength surged immensely, elevating it overnight into a leading imperialist power in the world, while China was completely knocked down, losing all capacity to resist foreign aggression. Nearly 2,000 years of Chinese strength and Japanese weakness, inverted into Chinese weakness and Japanese strength. Respecting might rather than virtue is the deep-seated soul of the Japanese character. It has never changed. When China was powerful in the past, Japan knelt and served as China's little brother. Now that China was weak, not only did Japan fail to show gratitude, but it sought to kick you when you were down and swallow China whole in one gulp. The First Sino-Japanese War in 1894, the Eight-Nation Alliance invasion in 1900, the September 18th incident in 1931, the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937. Japan and China fought a total war for years. The vast majority of suffering endured in modern Chinese history was brought about by the Japanese. Tens of millions of Chinese compatriots perished under the blades of the Japanese, and countless ancestral treasures turned to ashes in Japanese gunfire. After the founding of New China, why did the first-generation collective leadership endure such immense pressure to resolutely pursue the 2 bombs and 1 satellite project? Did they honestly want to fight a nuclear war with the US and Soviet Union? No, China's national strength was weak at the time. Even if nuclear weapons were successfully developed, their quantity and quality could not compare to the US and Soviet Union. What ultimately decided victory would still be conventional warfare, and our true targeted objective was always Japan. No matter who attacks me, I will strike Japan. The lesson of the Japanese invasion of China was far too profound. That generation of compatriots preferred to eat chaff and swallow vegetables, enduring hunger and starvation, just to decisively sever any possibility of Japan ever launching another war of aggression against China. We could not leave all problems to future generations. Problems that could be solved had to be resolved in our generation. This was the intense historical sense of responsibility possessed by New China's first-generation leadership. The desolate autumn wind is here again, but the world has changed. In today's era, Japan's aggressive ambitions are stirring once more. The newly instated Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi has frantically clamored that if China reunifies with Taiwan, Japan will wage armed intervention and drag the United States into it as well. Do not think this is merely Sanai Takaichi's personal opinion. Understanding Sino-Japanese history makes that clear. A deep sense of historical responsibility. The bleak autumn wind blows again, but the world has changed. In this day and age, Japan's aggressive ambitions are stirring once again. Newly appointed Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi, the Japanese PM, is crying out frantically that if China reunites Taiwan, Japan will intervene by force and drag the US into it too. Don't think this is just Takaichi's personal opinion. Look at Sino-Japanese history to know. That's the collective view of the Japanese nation.